I'm Pete Erickson. I'm the founder of Modev, and I've had one of the best seats in the house as it relates to the technology world and technology communities. And I've been very fortunate that I chose community building as my vocation about 12 years ago, as I've just been able to meet so many bright minds from around the world. And today's webinar is a great example of that. So we have two co-panelists today. Jody Ruby is the VP of Marketing at LXT. She comes to us with over 20 years of experience, the last 5 really focused on the market for AI. So brings a lot of relevant experience to the table. And I've known Jody for almost a year now. Jody and I were supposed to have coffee in Seattle, but my trip got canceled last minute. So we're still going to get that coffee someday, Jody, I promise.
Yeah. Hope so.
And Phil Hall is the Chief Growth Officer at LXT, and he's joining us from Sydney, Australia, where it is just after 6 in the morning. So he's got his coffee ready. Phil comes to us with 25 years of basically linguistics experience, and that is having all that decades of linguistics experience to have this conversation today. He's worked with some of the largest companies in the world, and we're excited to have his knowledge on tap for us today. LXT did a very smart thing. They went out and got a lot of research, a lot of qualitative research. I've had some time with this report, and I can tell you, there were some things that really stuck out to me. The data is deep. It's really, really solid. This is going to be a fabulous presentation. And I think you're going to see some surprises in how companies are embracing AI, the role that conversational AI plays in an overall AI architecture. And with that, I don't want to give away too much. Let's get into this here. And please welcome our co-hosts, Phil Hall and Jody Ruby. Phil and Jody, hello.
Hi there.
Hi, Pete. Hi, everyone.
So I want to remind folks as well, just to use the Q&A button at any time. So we'll be answering questions. I've got a few questions of my own, but you're welcome to use the Q&A button down there. You can use the chat feature as well, but we prefer the Q&A button. It lets us track the questions a little easier. So with that said, let's jump in here. So let's, I guess, Jody, you want to take off and let us know a little bit more about LXT?
Yeah, I'll do that. But first, I just want to say thanks again for having us here today. It's great to have the chance to share this research with the community. I also wanted to say that this is baseline data. This is the first time that we've conducted this survey. So just keep that in mind. And we do plan to redo the survey over time and sort of track some of the trends here. And then also, in the interest of time, we're just going to be looking at a subset of the findings. So you'll all receive a copy of the report, so you'll get a lot more detail there. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that. And then we can jump in and I can provide you just a brief overview of LXT on the next slide. Many of you probably haven't heard of us. And that's because, we've actually been kind of operating under the radar. We've been around for 11 years working in the AI data space. But we actually just rebranded the company last fall, and now we're really starting to tell our story as the market for AI has really exploded. We are in the AI data business, and what that means is that we provide the data that's needed to train AI systems. And we do that through a combination of data collection and data annotation or data labeling programs. And we work with a variety of companies. It could be small startups all the way to large global companies. Some of the areas that we're known for are our market reach in terms of the countries, the number of countries that we work in. We work in over 95 countries. We have quite a depth and breadth of language coverage, working in more than 230 languages. And we're also really laser focused on quality. That's something that our customers really care about. And so we provide a 100% quality guarantee, and we work very closely with them to meet their expectations when it comes to quality. All right, so let's jump into the goals for the research. The first goal here was to really understand what is going on from an AI investment standpoint, and where do companies see themselves on the maturity curve? And this is really from the perspective of senior executives. Then we wanted to look at what are the drivers behind all of these investments, and what are the benefits that some of the companies are getting from AI? And specifically, this was with US organizations. And then we wanted to look at what are some of the trends by maturity stage and also by industry. So if we go into the next slide, we'll see the survey methodology here. If you go back, oh, yeah, there we go. So just an overview on our methodology for the survey. We did a survey of 200 senior decision makers, and 2/3 of those are from the C-suite. And one of the things I want to point out here is that this is pretty unique. So a lot of the research that you'll see out there covers a wide range of roles. And this is really focused on the senior decision makers within companies. We also required them to have relevant AI experience. And we did that by filtering out people based on some qualifying questions that we put into the survey. And by doing that, we actually disqualified 75% of the people who were interested in the survey. So this is a pretty relevant group when it comes to AI. We looked at firms with annual revenue of over 100 million and company size greater than 500 employees. And we also worked with a fantastic partner out of the UK called Reputation Leaders. They helped us with the survey, and the research was done in late 2021. So it's very, very recent. So you can go to the next slide here. And we're going to start by looking at the AI investment. The first slide here is really just a snapshot of a wide range of industries. So what we found in our research is that 70% of organizations are spending $1 million or more on AI, and 15% of them are spending 51 million or more on AI. So as you can see, this is a good snapshot, kind of giving you a sense of what's happening today when it comes to AI investment. And we're excited to see how this trends over time as we do the survey in the future. So what we did then was we took that last slide and we broke it down by company size. And as you would expect, the larger the company is, the more they're spending on AI. And that's pretty common sense. But I think where this is helpful is for benchmarking purposes. So for example, if I'm a company that's generating more than $1 billion in revenue, I can look at this and say, 43% of my peers are actually spending $51 million or more on AI. So if I'm not in that range, I could potentially use this as a business case to go and secure more funding. So this slide really goes into kind of what's driving all this investment. And we gave the folks responding to this survey many options to choose from, as you can see here. And what came up to the top as a key driver for AI was innovation and product development. And that's followed by wanting to scale more quickly. So those are the items that came to the top. And there's several other items here that are kind of clustered together, as you can see: competitive advantage, risk management, needing to manage large volumes of data. Those are all kind of in the same range there. But what you can see is that people are really using AI to drive innovation and product development. And one of the things, a couple of things that were pretty interesting to me on this one is cost savings came in pretty low. That was a bit of a surprise. And also the CIO, CEO, and board influence. So when I started in this industry 5 years ago or so, I would imagine if we had done this survey at that time, that would have gone way to the top. And that was because at that time, a lot of management teams were being mandated by their boards and CEOs to go out and investigate this technology. It was newer at the time and people hadn't really harnessed it. But now what we're seeing is as the technology is playing out and as it's showing ROI, that has really decreased in terms of importance and pressure there. And you're seeing decrease also on the cost saving side. People are starting to show ROI with this, and so they don't need to prove that out, and they're moving more towards innovation. So then what we did was we asked, what if you look sort of outside of your organization and at your industry as a whole, what are some of the gains that you can get from AI? And here we actually see efficiency and productivity come to the top. And this was consistent across all the industries we looked at, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. The one standout was financial services, and what they said was improved analytics actually was the biggest benefit. And that's pretty, that's something that you would expect over there. But for everybody else, efficiency and productivity came to the top. Again, cost reduction, lower on the list. And what's interesting here is customer retention is the lowest on the list. And one thought I had here is that practitioners, when they kind of look at their industry as a whole and maybe the level of maturity there, they think, well, AI is probably being used to deploy for efficiency and productivity use cases rather than customer retention. But when they look at their industry, or sorry, their organization and how they're using it, it's really more about driving innovation. So we can kind of see that contrast between the two slides there. All right, so now we're going to get into AI maturity, and this is kind of exciting. I like this part. So the first part here is I wanted to show the model that we use to determine the level of AI maturity within an organization, and this is a model that Gartner put out. So you can see here that companies start at the awareness phase. This is the very early stages where they're trying to figure out what is the business case that we want to solve with AI, but they have a risk of overhyping, which means if they don't get laser focused and they really try to boil the ocean, they could completely miss getting to maturity. So that's kind of the earliest stages of this. Then they move to the active stage. And this is where they've identified some business problems to solve, and they're actively running experiments to apply AI to those business problems. And then they move to the operational phase. And this is really where AI is in production, it's creating value, it's demonstrating ROI. And the thing is that moving from active to operational is a really, really big step in a company's AI journey, because Gartner said that 85% of AI projects actually fail. And so when you think about what it takes to move from active to operational, that's a really big jump. So here they're demonstrating ROI against one business case or maybe a few, and then they move to systemic. And this is where they're actually really deploying it against an entire digital process or a supply chain, something like that. And then they reach the holy grail. And this is where it's part of their entire business DNA. And so what we did was we asked respondents to rank themselves against where is your company in this curve. And so in the next slide, we'll actually see the results. So what we found here is that 60% of companies that we surveyed consider themselves to be in the earliest stages of maturity. So we have 45%, so most of that are in the experimentation phase, 15 are still in the awareness phase. We have 40% that has said they've moved into the operational, systemic, or transformational, sort of the maturing phases of this journey. And that's really exciting to see. But there's still, that 40%, that's really exciting to see that 40% have reached maturity, but we're still seeing that 60% haven't made it to that stage yet. And there's several reasons for that. There are a lot of studies out there that actually talk about what are some of the challenges of moving from pilot to production. And some of those can be a lack of talent needed to drive these AI initiatives. It could be the regulatory environment and all of the pressures there. It could also be that they don't have enough quality data to train their systems. And so anyway, this is a really important part of the survey that we're excited to see how it trends over time. So then what we did was we looked at the budgets and we said, how does this kind of look when you take everybody who's in the experimenter bucket versus everybody who's in the maturing bucket? And so we have these two segments. And as you can see, as you would kind of expect, the folks who are in the experimenter phase are leaning in more at the lower budget side of things. And the folks on the maturing side are leaning into the higher budgets. And you can see the differences there. Now, one thing I wanted to point out in this is that we recognize that these bands here are very wide. There is more granularity and detail in the report, so you'll find that there. But this is a part of the survey that we want to refine over time. But it does show you kind of the different levels of investment that are happening at different stages in the journey. All right, so then we also wanted to understand what types of machine learning are companies using at different stages of their journey. And we gave them the opportunity to answer. They had 3 choices. They could answer one or more between supervised learning, semi-supervised learning, and unsupervised learning. And just to go into this a little bit, supervised learning is machine learning that requires labeled data. Unsupervised is where it doesn't need labels. And then semi-supervised is a combination of both. Super supervised, that's another machine learning term we could come up with. But anyway, we could see here, so people could choose one or more. And what you could see here is at the awareness stage, they're really leaning into all of the different methods here. But then as they mature and as they move from more of a theoretical approach to AI to more of a production and real world application of AI, you see that they're actually leaning in more to the supervised and semi-supervised learning, machine learning types, and unsupervised learning really kind of diminishes in importance and takes a backseat. All right, so earlier I talked about the business drivers and what's really driving all this investment. And we did look at this now by maturity level. So you can see that at the earliest stages of the journey, innovation and product development still holds. That's still the top benefit and driver for AI. But once companies get to the systemic phase, we see a shift. So you can see here the difference. And I know these charts are a little hard to follow. So that's why you really want the report so you can study it closely. But you see the shift where now scaling more quickly really rises to the top. And this is pretty interesting to look at from a trend perspective. So you can see at the awareness stage, scaling is not a priority. But as they move through the journey, it becomes much more of a priority and really kicks in at the systemic and transformational phase. And that makes a lot of sense because at the awareness stage, the active stage, you're really only deploying this against one or more use cases. But then as you get to systemic and transformational, that's where you're deploying AI across a whole business process or across your whole business. And so it makes sense that now companies have really developed their products and they've gotten all the operational benefits of AI. That's where they really want to scale. And they want to also capture more market share and drive competitive advantage. As you can see that kind of rises to the top there as well. All right, so with that set up, now I'm going to hand it over to Phil, and he's going to talk about the importance of training data and some of the other trends that we saw when we looked at the industry side of things.
Great, thanks, Jody. Okay, so I'll just say up front, we're in the data space, okay? So when we put together a set of questions for this, we were aiming to get a generic picture of the AI industry as a whole, not specifically data, but given that we're in the data space, we also made sure that we included quite a lot of questions about AI data. The fact that we have an emphasis on AI data is unsurprising, but one of the things that you find as we look through here is that everybody else has got quite an emphasis on AI data as well, and that was one of the things that took us by surprise. We knew data was important, otherwise we wouldn't have a business, but we were quite surprised by just how meaningful the data piece was for the community as a whole. Okay, so just looking at this chart here, and I can't point because Pete's driving the slides for me, but so I can't point at things on the slides. But if you take a look here, what we're looking at is what are the biggest contributors to success of AI, and looking at the first column here, where it's the total column, you can see that you've got, yeah, thank you, that's very nice, Pete. We've got oversight and quality control, good algorithms, well annotated training data. These all make good sense. That emphasis is perhaps underscored if you look down at the bottom of the scale there and you see the two bottom items are skilled employees and good models. That does really emphasize the, I know obviously you see the data focus at the top there and the actual applications, but it's quite surprising to see that skilled employees and good models rated so low on that scale. Again, that was a surprising finding for us. But if I draw your attention to, if I draw your attention to the quality training data, which is at 44% there, and take a look at the trend line. There's a distinction between companies that are at the earliest stages saw quality training data as relatively unimportant, And by the time that you get across to the systemic and transformational stage, it's a very clear highest priority item, so if you think of the difference between awareness and systemic and transformational as the difference between theory and practice, you're finding that in theory, folks didn't think that data was particularly important, but in practice, the ones who are actually at the well-advanced stage of maturity definitely think that data is very high importance. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Okay, I'll just walk through, I should say, the kind of AI that we're looking at here is very, very broad. This audience is potentially most interested in things related to voice, speech, language, conversation, etc. But it is definitely a much broader survey than that. But I will use things from conversational AI, from speech data, for examples, just to explain some of the distinctions that you're going to see on these slides here. So, and apologies for those of you who are, know this much better than I do, particularly for my explanation. But if we take a look at the components of, sorry, just back one there, Pete, taking a look at the components of this, conversational AI, it's a complex piece that requires lots of data. I mean, in order to do it, you need recognition, language understanding, response prediction, natural language generation, and then synthesized speech response, all of which rely on data. So that's just to say, if you're doing this, you have a heavy emphasis on data. And it's also to say that the speech-related and conversational-related applications of AI are at the more complicated end of the scale, which on some of the later slides, you'll see why I make an emphasis of that point. Okay, thanks, Pete. Okay, so you'll also see that there's a distinction made between data quality and data annotation quality. And so on this next couple of slides, just pointing out how we work with clients on what you would consider data as the focus and where you would consider annotation as the focus. So when folks are in a development cycle, so they're bootstrapping products, we work with them on a basis where we initially work together with the client on designing a data collection in order to give them data that they can use to bootstrap a product and develop it. We go and collect it. We're the vendor here. Vendor annotates it. We hand it over to the client. They do training. The client deploys the product. Once the client's deployed the product, they can then collect live data. And that's where you see the orange dot at the bottom of the circle there. We come back in and do annotation. And from that point forward, it becomes an iterative cycle for data enhancement rather than for data development. If we go to the next slide, this is more how we work with clients at the more developed stage when they've got a deployed product. So you have someone saying, hey, Home Assistant, what's the most popular soft drink in Egypt? Client collects the live data, does speech recognition, sends us the audio plus the hypothesis. Vendor confirms whether that's correct, corrects the data, sends it back to the client. They feed it into the AI platform so machine learning can learn from it. They deploy and employ an improved model. And then we go back to collecting live data and you move through this iterative cycle of data enhancement. So that's just to emphasize the difference between where data quality is how you produce the data. Data annotation quality is when you already have the data because of the nature of your business and it's about enhancement of it. Thanks, Pete. Okay, so here, maturing companies are seeing the broader benefits of AI. Okay, now I'm not going to go into a line-by-line analysis of this, but if you take a look at these are all things that companies see as benefits. Okay, so you can deploy your resources more effectively, you can accelerate your product launch, improve competitiveness, improve agility. and so on. Now, if you take a look at the maturing column there, at the top of the maturing column, you've got accelerating product launch at 59%. And at the bottom, you've got reduced compliance risk at 40%. So they're seeing benefits in every single one of these areas in the range of 40 to 60%. In the experimenting column, so here I think, again, I would label these columns perhaps less euphemistically as theory versus practice. So the experimenters are working on what they think is going to happen. The maturing organizations are working on what they know happens. If you take a look at the experimenters, they only actually see two of these areas as giving them benefits above that 40% mark. So improved agility, 41%, deploying resources more effectively, 45%, whereas those who are already working in this field, they see benefits at greater than 40%, at a rate of greater than 40% on every single one of those parameters. So that just suggests that, to me anyway, that suggests that people who are in the tentative stages of AI really have probably underestimated how much AI can benefit their business compared to those who are already doing it. Thanks, Pete. Okay, this one here, a bit of a, there are lots of different numbers here, and if you're trying to read them on the fly, you might misread this. But the piece that I want to draw your attention to is that for 40%, 4 in 10 organizations allocate a high proportion, 70% plus of their AI budget to training data. So if you're looking at the percentages across the bottom of the graphic here, you can see that you have 19% of organizations are spending 61 to 70% of their budget, up through to a very small number are spending 91 to 100%. But that gives you 59% of AI budget being dedicated to training data on average. And you see that, a large proportion of the organizations are spending a lot of money on data. Thanks, Pete. Okay, this is one of the things that really took me by surprise. So we expected the need for data to grow. We took that as being something that was a reasonable expectation. But if you take a look at the information on the left of this graphic here, 66% of organizations believe that the need for data is going to increase, 33% that it's going to stay the same. And it says 1% there, that the number is actually 0.5%, because out of 200 senior executives surveyed, only one person thought that the need for training data was going to decrease. So we expected the trend to be what you see here. We didn't expect the trend to be anywhere near as overwhelming as it actually is. Sorry, and just on before I close on that, Pete, in the graphic on the right here, again, you see that the expected need for training data over the next 5 years by maturity level, those that are at the most advanced stage of AI maturity, that's where the skew is heaviest towards the needs going to increase. So you can see in the case of the systemic and transformational, 75% believe that this is going to increase. Okay, and AI trends by industry, maybe skip the next slide. Here, take a look at the, in the financial services bucket there, you can see that 43% of organizations in that sector are at the systemic and transformational level, which is more than any of the others. Our interpretation of this is that it's maybe twofold. It's one of the reasons we think that that's the case is that financial services are dealing with structured data, which gives them earliest access to application of AI. So if you're in some of the other sectors, you actually need to manipulate data, do a lot of work with data in order to be able to do things successfully, whereas financial services, they're dealing with high quality structured data from the get-go, and that enables them to get into this space very quickly. And it's a highly competitive space where AI can really deliver benefits. So we're not surprised to see that the maturity is at its highest level in that sector. Thanks, Pete.
Sure thing. I just want to remind folks that if you have questions, definitely please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get your questions answered. So we're just a few slides to go here. So we're looking for those questions. Go ahead, Phil.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I think Jody already covered a lot of this in the earlier section here. It's really only highlighting the differences by sector. And you can see that financial services, their sector looks a little bit different to some of the others, and that's potentially because they are at a more advanced stage of maturity and deployment. Thanks. Okay, this one is interesting. So types of data in use and planned for use in the future. So the orange columns are the types of data that people are using in AI currently, and the blue columns are those that they're planning to use in the future. So you can see, and there is, you know, the orange columns are descending from left to right, and the blue columns generally ascending from left to right. In the use currently, it's dominated by text, numerical, product, SKU, transactional. Those are the biggest sectors. And again, those are the kind of low-hanging fruit segments. They're the types of data that is most likely to come to the people planning to deploy it in a good structured form that allows early access to it. And if you look at the types of data that people are expecting to use into the future, so image, voice, audio, sensor, time series, user behavior, video, those types of data, they're all more complex problems. So they're likely to also be higher yield and greater level of differentiator in the market. So the data types that are dominating at the moment are the data types that are most easily accessible, but they're most easily accessible to everybody, so they're less of a differentiator. Whereas the data types that you see to the right are data types that require more of the organization that plans to deploy in those areas. They're more complex, more difficult, but I think potentially higher yield. So I think that that's where you'll see some of that very large investment in the future. I should say, just with this, what we're looking at with these, with all of this survey is people's perceptions. Okay, so we're not really dealing with hard facts here. These are people's perceptions and beliefs, and what we're giving you in summary here are our perceptions and beliefs regarding their perceptions and beliefs. So when you get hold of the data, it is pretty rich. We probably didn't ask all the right questions, and we'd love to get feedback from you on questions that you believe we should have asked, or we should have asked in a different way. We've already identified some. I'm not going to highlight them for you. I'll let you tell us if you think you've covered them. But you know, it's a bunch of perceptions, and we're giving you our interpretation of them. But we will be very interested in hearing yours. Again, this is yeah. I'm sorry. All right, just to summarize, that one there is that we just skipped over. That's a bit of a soup. So we'll leave that for later. So just to summarize, the companies that are in the systemic and transformational stage, which is the smaller proportion of 40%, they're budgeting higher amounts of overall data on their AI programs. They're using AI to scale and drive competitive advantage and product innovation. They're more reliant on supervised and semi-supervised machine learning than they are on unsupervised learning models. And they consider quality training data to be a key to the success of their AI strategies. Okay, and at that point, we'll hand over for questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was a fantastic presentation, very data rich. Ted Ganchieff writes, are these verticals typically developing their own use cases, or are they turning to AI providers to help contextualize how AI can help in their particular industry vertical?
I believe they are developing their own, but I honestly don't know. And that's not a question I asked. Jody, do you have a strong view?
I don't. I think that's something actually would be interesting for us to look into, but we didn't ask that in the survey. Yeah, I think it'd be a good one to kind of probe on.
Great. Well, I spent some time with this data. I think one of the things that I love to ask researchers when they go and grab some research is, was there anything that stuck out to you? What was the surprising finding? I would love for both of you to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. You know, there are several things that came out, and I know Phil highlighted some of those. For me, I would say that seeing that 40% of companies have made it to maturity was actually surprising and encouraging. I mean, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I know there are a lot of challenges when it comes to deploying AI. So to see that was really encouraging. And I think that if we had done this research before the pandemic and compared it to now, I think that would have been really telling, because I think the pandemic actually accelerated a lot of digital transformation, right? So probably what we're seeing here is an output of that. And a lot of lessons learned in the early days that are being applied now, best practices that people are learning from. So that for me was really encouraging. And I just am excited to see how that evolves over time as we continue this research.
Yeah, in fact, I could add to that. We have this 60-40 split between maturing organizations in the 40% and the emerging organizations in 60%. It is worth remembering that none of the organizations surveyed are small startups. These are all quite large organizations. And it was interesting to see that even at that scale, 60% considered themselves to be still at the experimenting stage.
Interesting. That's a very good point. So what do you think is, when do we hit the tipping point? When does it become, 49 to 51%? When are we going to hit that? Is that a 2023, 24? What do you think?
Do you want to go, Phil? I haven't thought of it.
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe it will be. And in fact, I wonder if it'll be a very, very slow move, because each time that we survey, the goals that people are setting for their AI, the expectations they will have for AI will move further out into the future. And therefore, it may be quite static at that level for a very long time.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
go ahead, Jody, please.
Yeah. So when you say tipping point, I mean, you're saying sort of that 51% is in the maturing phase. Yeah. And I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of positive traction here. There's some industries that are ahead, like financial services, and there are a lot of great lessons learned there. And we're also seeing companies really kind of take this AI first movement that was started back in 2017 with Google, and they're now starting to kind of operationalize that within their organizations and take that to heart. And so I think, they're asking questions about how do we consistently improve our models? How do we really take advantage of all of our data? And so that's all positive. When we get to 51%, I don't know, I'll say maybe in a few years.
Okay. All right.
I'll put that out there, Phil.
I think that's a few years is a great, I think, a great estimate. I thought one thing that stuck out to me is that in the technology sector, or actually maybe just overall, that customer retention wasn't cited as a higher priority for rolling out AI initiatives. It just seems to me that that would be a higher priority. Actually, it was, now that I think of it, it was a higher priority in the tech sector, but in the other verticals, it wasn't cited, which really tells you then this is about efficiency. It's about operational efficiencies. That stuck out to me.
Yeah, Jody?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm still thinking about that one.
I told you I did have some time with this data. I was able to see some of these,
you're right.
trends. It
You're
just was
right.
interesting. Customer retention wasn't cited as high, but operational efficiencies were seen as a super high priority.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier that I think when people look outside their industry, they're kind of looking at it as a whole. They're probably looking at the level of maturity with that industry and saying, people are still kind of looking at it as a way to drive efficiency rather than customer retention. People who are maybe closer to maturity are trying to sort of take their products and really, work on retention. And we see that actually with the data slide. We didn't spend a lot of time on that, but when you look at the types of data that are planned to use, user behavior actually popped up there. And to me, that's a signal that they're starting to think about how do we get closer to the customer? How do we use user behavior data to really understand how customers are interacting with our products and use that in our AI systems? And so I think in the future, that could be something that, customer retention and user behavior and all of those things is something that they're looking at developing down the road.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'd also add to that. I think the customer retention piece, it may be due to our screening processes. It may be an artifact of our screening processes. So in order to qualify to participate in the survey, you had to be quite hands-on with AI, not just somebody in the background who knew it was a good idea. You had to actually understand it. And potentially the people, that skews towards the more techie folks. Right. And if you'd asked some of their C-suite or VP level colleagues who are less hands-on with the AI, it might have been a much bigger priority for them.
Sure. I can understand that.
Just as we found that board input was considered to be quite low. If you asked members, they might consider it to be quite important.
Clinton Day has a great question here. How prevalent is the post-iteration correcting the absences in voice recognition? So many in use do ask the right questions? Question mark. Does that make sense? You can. Sorry,
give me that again.
How prevalent is the post-iteration correcting the absences in voice recognition? So when there are things that are missing, maybe in a question, is somebody asking the right question, right? So I guess that maybe points to machine learning and taking that input that may be flawed and then applying it to the machine learning.
Yeah, we do a lot of that second iteration, that on the post-iterative work. But to be honest, I'm not hands-on, so I don't see exactly what kind of corrections are the most common.
Right.
I think probably basic recognition errors would still.
I see, Clinton. I see your second question. He said, when people do not ask the right question. I think we figured that out in the first question. But thank you so much for clarifying that. Yeah. So makes sense on the iteration that would need to happen there. I'm not sure how prevalent it is. I think the question, how prevalent is that in conversational AI? For all questions asked, how prevalent is it that there has to be a post-question iteration to find out more information? All right, so next question. How can active run so far ahead? How can active run so far ahead of awareness? So how can action run so far ahead of awareness? Anonymous attendee. I'm not sure I understand that question. If you want, please elaborate on that a little bit.
Need a little more data there.
Yes. What definition of AI was used? Oh, it's an interesting question, since AI is open to interpretation. So in your qualitative analysis, did you have a specific definition that you settled on with the folks you surveyed about the definition of AI?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually really broad. So we, we just stated it as AI. And so when people are talking about their investments in AI, for example, they could be talking about the tools, the people, the data, all of those components. When they're talking about the types of AI, it's really relevant to them. So it was very broad.
Great. Well, I'll tell you what, it's a fabulous report. And I'm happy to share that everybody that was a part of this webinar is going to get a copy of that report. We did have a question if people are going to get the slides as well. Are you going to?
Oh, we hadn't thought of that, but we can share them. Yeah, I think
sure. I don't see
totally
why not.
Fine.
We'll also have a recording of this webinar that will go out to everybody. After we do a little editing, a little intro edit and outro, and then we'll make sure they get the copy of the recording as well. So you're going to be fully armed with data. It's been a super informative session here. I want to thank Jody and Phil. Let's give it up for them. Little virtual handshake. Thank you. A little applause.
I had one thing.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just had one thing. If you want to contact us, please do so. My email is jodie@lxt.ai, and Phil is phil@lxt.ai, and we'd be happy to take your questions. And we'd love your input also for the survey, because we do plan to do it again.
Yes.
Yeah,
go ahead.
First iteration on the survey, first time out, and we immediately saw things that we wished we'd asked. And so if you think that you can help us to shape this into a better iterative survey process, then we would love your input.
Well, you've got an active team here. It looks like we've got a couple more questions. I'll make sure that you get those questions so you can send out the answers to everybody on the survey. Phil and Jody, any final thoughts before we do get going here?
I just appreciate everybody attending today and the engagement. So thanks so much.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a real pleasure to come and chat with you, Pete. You're always a great host.
Well, I'll tell you what, you got up early, now it's 6:51 a.m. your time in Sydney, Australia. Thanks for joining us from around the world. And for all of you all over the place, Germany and all across the world, thanks for joining us. And Phil and Jody, thanks again.